Among the Roses Red. Written by ThePokeOne, read by Envious Rat. Rating, general audiences. Fandom, DCU, Batman, all media types. Pairing, Tim Drake, Con L, Connor Kent. Summary. The woods bordering Wayne Manor are said to hold an array of fairies, but Tim is in search of one in particular, Con L. All stories paint him as the most enchanting of the fae, and Tim is more than willing to see how true the stories really are. Author's Notes. This is in no way the most accurate version of the Tam Lin myth/fairy tale, but I really needed more Tam Lin fics in literally any of my fandoms. If you enjoyed this fic, I highly recommend checking out these two YouTube videos that inspired it. The first is FolkAlley.com's song retelling of the myth, and the second is Overly Sarcastic Productions retelling. Both are really cool. Tim sat in his lonely room, looking out the window. He couldn't bring himself to seek out and bother his adopted father or siblings. Yes, he wanted company, but not quite that type. The woods were said to hold many fae folk, none as prominent in the stories as Con L. He was said to be the fairest, and by far the most alluring of them all. Should one enter the forest without their cloak and rings, and he found them, stories claim that he would take them as payment. Many young men and women have wandered into the woods for that very reason. What could he say? The idea of a fae boyfriend was appealing. Tim stood to his feet, dropping anything that could conceivably be considered payment, and purposely leaving his cloak before he left his room. He quietly walked through and out the manor, not running into a soul. He fast approached the woods. In studying the forest, Tim had found a great many shortcuts recorded through the years. Most thought them to be random spaces where fairies took their memories and dropped them somewhere else, but the lack of lost time made Tim believe different. Besides, it would be far more convenient if he could use shortcuts to get to the meadow. Tim approached an oddly shaped rock and laid his hand on it. He shut his eyes, and a strange sensation he couldn't begin to explain washed over him. When he opened his eyes, he stood on the edge of a meadow. Con L's meadow. Tim let out a sudden laugh. He was right! He took a few steps into the meadow, taking care not to crush too many flowers. Fairies could be touchy about that at times. Hardly any time had passed when Tim heard someone clearing their throat behind him. "Why do you come to my glade?" Tim turned around, heart already skipping at the fairy's voice. When he laid eyes on Con L, words failed to form. Con L's blue eyes were sharp and focused. His hair looked like silk, his skin was sun-kissed, and body toned in a way that made Tim's mouth water. Con L was more beautiful than anyone Tim had ever seen, and more awe-striking than any story made him out to be. "You bring no offering," he observed. "You do understand what that entails." He wasn't asking. "Not even gonna ask for my name?" Tim asked. "Why should that matter? Once your payment has been met, we shall never meet again. I shan't ever leave these woods, and you won't find this place again. It would do me no good to know your name." He took Tim by the sleeve and lowered him down onto the roses. Tim's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know if it was by magic or if the roses in the meadow were just naturally without thorns, but he felt nothing scratch his skin. It was over far too quickly, although Tim was certain he would have felt that way even if it had lasted late into the night. He wasn't sure when he'd fallen asleep, but when he awoke by the tree line for a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream. But he had never been able to recall a dream with such clarity. Tim stood to his feet. Only a few hours had passed by his measurements. He likely hadn't even missed supper. He began to trek back to the manor. His head was in the clouds. Tim had never truly known what pure bliss felt like until Con L laid him down and took him among the roses. And where any sane person would accept they should never stray into the land of the fae again, Tim craved Con L and his touch enough to tempt fate 1,000 times more. A few days passed before Tim allowed himself to return to the woods. No one had noticed the first time, and he went to great lengths to make sure they wouldn't this time either. All his work had been finished the night before, and with Dick not home, no one would seek him out. He made it past the tree line and looked around. If his predictions were correct, the woods had shifted half a mile west. The rock would still be the closest known shortcut to the meadow. It wasn't long before Tim arrived on the edge of Con L's meadow once more. He had barely walked into the flowers before he heard the fae's voice. "Why do you... Wait, what?" Tim turned around, this time far more prepared to see Con L's form. "I'm Timothy. but you can call me Tim, he said. You came back, Con-El said, sounding slightly shocked before recovering. Few find me twice. I guess you were just so handsome I couldn't stay away, Tim grinned. Con-El just stared for a moment, almost as if he was taking time to plan out his next words. You still lack proper payment for passage, I see. Did you truly wander straight back into the forest as soon as you awoke? I see no other way an ordinary mortal would stumble upon this place again. I didn't stumble upon anything. I studied maps of the woods and walked here. For the most part, Tim added a little quieter. Humans have no maps that can lead here, and no fairy would allow you one. Con-El gave him a skeptical look. Tim chuckled. Perhaps I'll tell you one day. Is payment required immediately, or would you like to continue our conversation? I doubt you have the chance to talk to many people. What led you to that conclusion? The first time we met, you said the same thing you tell everyone. You aren't being as eloquent with your language now, almost like you aren't as prepared to sound like an ancient fae. I never claimed to be ancient. The name El has been attributed to many. I had assumed. You're almost the same age as me, correct? Con-El tilted his head. I would think so, unless you are far older than you look. The third time the two met, Tim was given a name. My true name is Connor, he said, looking out towards a small pond. Your true name? Are you not concerned that I am a near stranger? Tim asked with a raised eyebrow. Maybe I trust you, Tim. You are less of a stranger than many I've met. Besides, Connor looked at Tim. Were you not the one to freely give your name to what may have been a malicious fade just last time? I suppose you have a point, Connor, Tim said, watching the smile on the other's face. It has been many years since I have heard my name on another's lips. Get used to hearing it then, Connor, 'cause I'm not going anywhere soon. Tim scooted closer, taking Connor's hand and pressing their foreheads together. Tim had lost count of how many times he had taken the trip to the meadow to see his lover Connor. It was fast approaching November, with only a fortnight until the 11th month came. Still the flower had yet to fade. Perhaps the nature of the woods kept it from ever dying. The rose Connor had given him many moons ago sat in his room in a vase without any sign of decay. He had steadily increased the amount of time he spent with Connor. He knew Alfred at least suspected something. The others, though, he wasn't so sure about. For a group of people so intelligent, they could be truly dense. Still, Tim wasn't all that concerned with his family learning about his lover, at least not for the time being, for his mind was a little too preoccupied with said man. Connor had begun acting weird lately. He seemed worried about something. Tim hadn't wanted to push him to talk about it if he did not wish, but within the last few visits, he only seemed worse. This concerned Tim greatly. Connor, he called out into the meadow, seeing him amongst the wild roses. Tim, he returned with a soft smile. When they were within an arm's distance, Connor took Tim's hands in his own. Tim, there's something I must tell you. What is it? Tim's eyebrows creased in concern. I fear I have not been entirely honest with you. All Hallows' Eve is fast approaching. What does that have to do with not being honest? I was not born a fae, nor am I one now. You are aware of the fact I cannot leave these woods. I'm as much human as you. He paused. Perhaps he wondered if the words would make Tim leave. Tim just squeezed his hands tighter as a sign to continue. I wandered into these woods and got lost as a young boy. The Queen of the Fairies took me, and as you know, when faced with the fae, there must always be a payment. Your payment is living in this meadow? Only for 7 years. The night of All Hallows' Eve, once every 7 years, the fairies must give a tithe to hell. They do not like sacrificing their own, so I will be the offering. What? No, Tim whispered, horrified. He couldn't lose Connor. As foolish as it sounded, especially as they had only known one another for a few short months, he didn't know if he could go on without him. Surely there must be a way. I won't let them take you. Connor worried his lip. There is a way, but... What? I'm willing to try anything. You must understand. If you were to fail, you would be the next sacrifice, and you would never be able to see your family again. This would not be something to agree to lightly. Tim looked Connor dead in the eye, with a hardened look. Tell me, he said. You would have to challenge the Fairy Queen. She would change me into all manner of creature while you held on. That's the challenge? Well, I won't be turned into a kitten. Connor deadpanned. I'm sure it'll be more along the lines of a bear or a rhinoceros. I don't know how long the trial would last either. If we pass the Fairy Queen's test, Tim said, you will be able to leave unharmed and do as you please? I would. Then I will take on the challenge. If I am sent to hell, the suffering wouldn't be near as bad as living in a world without you. Even if you bite and claw me as a beast, it'll be worth it to see your face. I won't hurt you, Connor promised. I could never hurt you. I know, Tim smiled, pressing a kiss to Connor's lips. Tim raced forward towards the manor. He had spent far too long in the woods with Connor, but All Hallows Eve was less than a week away, and he wished to spend as long as he could with him in case the Queen of Fairies managed to best them. As much as he loathed to admit it, the Fae could be quite fickle, especially with their dills. The manor came into view. A multitude of carriages sat in the yard, some with their horses, most without. The stables had to be full. It was far too late for him to slip in unnoticed, at least by his family. He ducked into a back door by the kitchen, for he would be far less likely to be caught by a party-goer in his current state. He only had to make it to the staircase and he would be in the clear. Perhaps he could lie and say he'd fallen ill. No, he wouldn't risk the chance of that leading to being babied to the point he couldn't make it to Connor in a few days. Maybe. His thoughts were interrupted by a throat being cleared behind him. Your father and siblings have been quite curious of your whereabouts, Master Tim. Alfred, I suggest you go get changed and join the party. I was going to, Tim trailed off. Of course, Alfred said as Tim slowly began to edge to the staircase. Ah, and Master Tim. Tim froze. Yes? I might also suggest you to cover up that rather obvious bruise on your neck. That is, unless you want everyone to know where you've been this evening. Tim's hand flew to his neck in a futile attempt to hide the mark Connor had left. I don't know what you mean. Alfred raised an eyebrow, giving him a scathing look. I am not an old fool. Now go get ready. I shall inform the others you'll be out soon. Tim could only manage a nod as Alfred turned and left. The ballroom was lively, with ladies and gentlemen about. A few halted their dancing to look upon Tim as he entered, clearly nervous to the trained eye, even though the false air of calmness and confidence he'd cultivated over the years quickly offset by the guests' confusion. Tim spotted Dick across the room. He stood by, and was likely chatting with an older woman who Tim vaguely recognized. Dick glanced over, meeting his eyes. Tim raised his hand in a wave, hoping his smile didn't come off as awkward to his brother. Tim walked to the edge of the room. Dick, unfortunately, wasn't far behind. Tim, Dick said, where have you been? You weren't in your room or even the gardens. We've been worried sick. Tim sucked in a breath. I was fine. There was nothing for you to be worried about. Dick's eyes shone with concern as they drifted to the carefully hidden spot on Tim's neck. Were you attacked? No, can we drop it? Tim practically pleaded. You've been acting strange the past few months, Tim. I wish you would tell us what's going on. This isn't the place to discuss it. It isn't, Dick reluctantly agreed. That doesn't mean I'm dropping this. Of course you won't, Tim muttered under his breath. Tim stood in the setting room, surrounded by his family, including Stephanie for some reason. She wasn't even one of Bruce's kids. It looked like she was the only thing keeping Cassandra and Duke from leaving. Bless those two. They were the least nosy, and least outwardly. They also weren't openly mocking him like Jason and Damien. He was very glad. He'd pulled up his collar to hide Connor's mark. Tim, son, if you've gotten in some sort of trouble, Bruce began. I'm not in trouble, Tim said. That was mostly the truth. That doesn't mean we aren't worried about you, Dick said. You're sneaking out, coming home with bruises? Where are the bruises? Stephanie interrupted. His neck, Dick said. But Stephanie walked up to Tim. Show me. No, it's none of your business. Stephanie, Bruce said, stopping her from further invading Tim's space. After she stepped back, he let his hand come up to the collar of Tim's shirt. May I look? Tim knew it wasn't a question. Okay, he said finally. Bruce lowered the fabric, looking at the makeup-covered bruise. Taking out his handkerchief, he carefully wiped the place clean. After inspecting it, he tried to look back into Tim's eyes, but Tim refused to meet his gaze. Are you seeing someone? Tim nodded. I love him. You can't make me stop seeing him. I have no intention to, Bruce said. This boy, does he treat you well? He does. Bruce gave a small smile. Then I only ask you bring him over for us to meet. I believe I can do that, Tim said, returning the smile. If all goes well, I should be able to bring him to the ball on All Hallows Eve. The morning of All Hallows Eve came far too soon. Tim had informed Connor of the conversation he had had a few days prior, that he'd promised to bring him home when they succeeded. Meeting the winds was not something one should be caught off guard by. The night before, Tim had made sure all of his papers were organized on his desk to be easily found in the worst-case scenario. He left his maps and meticulous notes on how the forest moved along with letters to explain what happened. He wouldn't leave his family completely in the dark should he disappear and never return. He took his leave early so that he wouldn't be stopped and forced into a conversation. He raced through the woods, straight to the meadow where Connor stood waiting for him. Tim linked their hands. "I'm here," he said. An uncertain amount of time passed, the two lovers speaking in hushed tones when the Queen appeared by the trees, only a few yards away. "Con-El," she said. Her voice somehow managed to echo all around them. "Who is this?" Connor and Tim leapt to their feet. "I'm here to challenge you for Con-El's freedom," Tim said, standing tall before Connor could speak. "Are you now? And what's your name, boy?" "You may call me Tim." The Fairy Queen looked somewhat peeved at the refusal to reveal his true name, but pushed on. "Are you truly foolish enough to risk your life for a fairy?" "Without a doubt." Tim gave a firm squeeze to Connor's hand. "Very well." Without another word, the Queen waved her hand, and Connor began to transform. Tim clung to him as tight as he could. At first he changed into a wild wolf. Tim held tightly, refusing to let go, even as he thrashed in his arms. Without warning, Connor then morphed into a slippery lizard. One would think that was easier than the wolf, but there was nothing to hold. Yes, he was smaller and lighter, but the new maneuverability counteracted any advantages Tim had otherwise gained. Right when he began to fear Connor would slip from his fingers, the Fairy Queen transformed him into a bear. Tim clung to the fur, even as he threatened to crush him in a roll that never came. Tim couldn't help the smile. He pressed into Connor's stomach as he clung to him. Even the magic from the Queen of Fairies was not enough to make Connor hurt him. From there he turned into a chunk of red-hot iron. Tim could feel the heat, even the pain, somewhat, but not a blister one appeared on his hands. Tim thought the Queen must have begun to grow tired of the trial when she turned Connor into a fire. Yet still, Tim somehow managed to hold him. How, he didn't know, but he did. Tim looked at the pond that sat to the side of the meadow and got an idea. As the flames licked his face without releasing Connor, he drug him under the water. Then he felt him change again, one final time into a naked man. Pulled their heads above water, both gasping for air. They stumbled to dry land, grinning at each other, with nothing but love in their eyes. "Surely this is a wonderful moment for you," the Fairy Queen said with absolutely no sincerity. She looked at Connor with a vicious glare. "If I had known you would end up in a relationship with a mortal, I would have begun by petrifying your eyeballs." With that, she waved her hand once more, and the boys sat at the edge of the woods. Tim wrapped Connor in his cloak and pressed their foreheads together. Time seemed to freeze as Tim stared into Connor's eyes. They had won. He let out a joyous laugh and drugged Connor into a kiss. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," Connor said with a grin so large it rivaled Tim's own. "We aren't going in those woods ever again." No, we are not." The end. Thank you for listening to Among the Roses Red. I hope that you enjoyed listening. I know that I enjoyed podficking it and doing this makeup look inspired by it. I hope that you have a good rest of your week, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye!